Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for joining me for this hopefully really quick video about data protection strategies. A little bit of backstory here. I'm always asked from customers and from other Veeam engineers, how do we take all these components, all these really cool Veeam tools, immutability, ransomware, scale up Active repositories, the cloud backups, the performance tiers, right? All these cool components. How do we put them together into something that is relatable to the business, right? How do we hit the business requirements with this great technology? A little bit of backstory. Prior to joining this career path, I was an IT leader in a number of industries, including financial services, manufacturing, and healthcare. In particular, the healthcare situation was interesting because we were burdened, or we were asked as IT professionals to come up with data retention policies for the business. Well, we were the last people that should be coming up with those policies, right? That should be coming from our legal teams or our business leaders. I like to use the term custodians. We're data custodians. We are, as IT people, we're not the owners of data. We are the protectors of data, ultimately the creators and the people that need that information or that data are elsewhere in the business. So I went to my legal team and said, hey, what are our data retention policies? And they told me it was an IT issue. Well, clearly that's not the case. So I get asked this a lot. I have some particular background in it. So I did put together some video, or I should say a web page rather, that gives you just some sample considerations, right? How do I take these components, which I'm learning about with Veeam, and put them together into a concise strategy for my business. So I'm going to share my desktop. What we have here is it's a screenshot or a website rather, randylee.com. If I click on the miscellaneous and the data protection blueprints page, so again, randylee.com, miscellaneous data protection blueprints. I put some notes together. This is by no means formal, right? It's just based on my personal experience, personal opinions, information that I hear from customers, information I hear from peers. The idea here is to put together a policy for our business. So organizing information, right, so it can be searched and accessed later, right? Who cares if we're backing data up if we can't access it later? And then more importantly, or I should say equally important, is when we get rid of that data, right? At some point, that data is no longer relevant. The older it gets, the less important it is. So I put some links out here, and it's entirely up to you which ones you look at. There's some backup standards guides here. Uh, ISO, right? We talk a lot about ISO, and here's a couple different guides. Another diagram, or I should say another uh, uh, informational source that I like to use is the NIST Special Publication 800-171. Right, this talks about protecting controlled information in non-federal organizations. There's a number of useful context here. When in doubt, go to NIST, right? I like to remind people that there are SOX compliance requirements. There are GDPR, right? A whole formal requirement process around data privacy and data management. Some California rules, CCPA, HIPAA, right? Coming back to my healthcare experience, that's where I had to base most of my decisions. I had to research HIPAA, right, along with our legal team and come up with a policy. Another concept I like to remind people about is, we're not, as IT professionals, we're not the owners of the data. We are the custodians. And ultimately, there should be someone who's the chief privacy officer in your organization, right? If it's not the CIO, right, and maybe it shouldn't be, right, it's probably your chief legal team. Or maybe it's someone outside the organization that has provided some uh, relevant resource, right, for what you do in your particular business. So, ask your leadership team, do we have a CPO, a chief privacy officer, right? Because, as IT people, you don't want to be setting the policies for yourself. You would ideally, right, want the business to set those policies for you. A couple more interesting links here. What are some data retention policy best practices? Creating a data archiving process for your growing data sets, right? It's all about information lifecycle management, particularly stage 3, right? The disposal of information. How do you retain it? How do you protect it? And then how do we get rid of it? The last thing you want is your own data, right, to be used against you, right? Maybe you have a small retention set of 6 months or something, right? Again, it's all about what your business is expecting. There's really two elements. There's the legal requirements, right, and the business requirements, and they may not always be the same, right? The business says, after 30 days, I don't really care about the data. However, depending on my industry, I may need to go back several weeks, months, years. The whole concept is grandfather, father, son, retention, right? What am I keeping today? What am I keeping for multiple weeks, multiple years? How will I be safeguarding your data, right? Here's where we'll talk a little bit more about scale up backup repositories and immutability and 32110. We'll come back to those concepts. And then what is your plan for protecting your backup? So if I were to start with a data or start as a new Veeam customer, right, protecting my data, I'd ask myself these three questions. What are my legal and business requirements? How are they in line with my SLAs, right? And I do have some defined SLAs, or I should say some sample SLAs here. Safeguarding, we'll come back to that, and ransomware. Important concept I want to remind everyone of: backups versus archives, right? A backup copy, the sole purpose is to recover after a data loss situation, data damage situation, right? Or some kind of corruption following a specific incident. So the backup is something happened, I need to recover. That is different than an archive, which is really inactive data. At some point, that data becomes less relevant to me. I don't need it close to my source, right? I don't need to have high performance recovery, but I do need to go back for whatever reason, right? And your legal team will tell you what that is. I have a couple sample protection blueprints here. I'll be adding more on this website, but I'll show you these two first as starting points. So again, based on those three questions, right? Based on your SLAs, what are your data life cycles? How will you be safeguarding your backups? And what's your plan for protecting your backups from ransomware? So let's start at the top. Again, just a sample. You can use anything you want. A common retention scheme that I see is, daily retention points for 10 days, weekly retention points are 8 weeks, monthly retention points are 8 months, and yearly for 2 years. So 10 days, 8 weeks, 8 months, 2 years. That nets 38 recovery points, right? It's important to note with Veeam, though, that you may have more recovery points based on your backup chains, right? How your backups are constructed. So there will be at least 38 points, probably more, right? And we can talk about the mechanics behind that offline. So fine, this is my retention schedule. These are set up in backup jobs. So let's say I have, 5 or 6 backup jobs. They may all follow this retention schedule, or they may not. You may have different policies based on different SLAs. So keep that in mind. Not all data is the same. Certainly, customer information is different than repository I have for anything, right? Some useful tool internally and not customer facing. So set at the job level. How will you be safeguarding your backups? This is where we start talking about scale out backup repositories, right? It's where I'm writing my data to. So let's think about this. I have this performance tier. Let's go back to my home page because I think there's some relative content here. I have my primary workloads. They can be virtual, physical, or NAS, right, at my primary location. I'm going to back those up via a Veeam backup job to this scale out backup repository. That's this whole entity here. We have this performance tier, which is local disk or local high performance target for my backups. Then I have my offline or archive, right? It could be AWS. It could be, well, let's look at some of the options here, right? It could be AWS. It could be Azure, IBM, Google. This is what I'm using as my capacity tier. It's data that's been around a little while. It's important to me, but not so important that I need to have a copy on site for fast recovery. And then I have this archive tier, right? So let's walk through this again. My primary systems, right? ESXi, Hyper-V, Nutanix, NAS, physical, doesn't matter. I take all this source information and via backup jobs, I send it down to a nearline target, which could be direct-to-test storage, could be a NAS target, could be a dedupe appliance, right? A piece of hardware specifically designed for this function, or a hardened Linux, and we'll come back to all this. And I'm going to keep this on this performance tier for a certain time frame, and either immediately copy it to my archive or offline tier, or move it at a later date. So we'll come back to that. So back to this original policy, backups are written to my performance tier, my on-premise storage, in the scale-up backup repository. Why do I do that? I want my recovery, I should say my backups to run fast, and my recovery to be immediately available. In this particular job, I'm going to do a copy function and a move function. So within my scale-up backup repository, I'm going to immediately copy my data from my performance tier, again, my on-premise storage, to my capacity tier out in the cloud. So this could be any cloud provider, right? AWS, Wasabi, Azure, and have immutability configured, right? So this is part of safeguarding my data. I land my data on my performance. I immediately copy it to another location, right? To a capacity tier out in the cloud, and mark as immutable for 21 days. So layer that on top of your retention policy up here, right? 10 days, 8 weeks, 8 months. The first, I should say, the previous 21 days back from when that backup job is done is marked as immutable. After 21 days, I'm going to move that data from the performance tier, right? So within 21 days, my data is both on my performance tier and on my capacity tier. After 21 days, I'm going to move, which is in essence a delete, from my performance tier, right, to my capacity tier. And I'll show you in a summary right down below what that really means. And then archive, right? After a certain period of time, I just picked 120 days. Your mileage may vary, right? Whatever your business and legal requirements state. Move my data from my capacity tier to my archive tier. So if I look at it here, it's move my data, say, from AWS S3 and move it down to Glacier, or take it from Azure Blob and move it to Azure Archive, right? That's all done within this, offline archive, right, tier. So performance tier, right? That's where my data lands. Immediately copied to my performance tier. I'm sorry, my capacity tier. And then after 21 days, it's deleted from this performance tier and left on the capacity tier for 120 days, where it's moved to archive. I like to remind people, leverage Veeam storage integration. Click on this link for more information, right? We can directly access your primary storage, right? Whether it be HPE or NetApp or Pure, whatever your primary storage is. And please, 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 please remember, snapshots are not backups, right? Snapshots are part of your overall data protection strategy, but please don't treat them as backups. I've heard this analogy too. I thought it was pretty interesting. If I take a piece of paper, right, and I copy it and I leave it on my desk, it's immediately available, right? It's within my proximity, it's within my reach. I can immediately recover to that piece of paper. However, it's also on that same desk. If something happens to my desk, well, that paper's gone too. That's why I move it to a secondary location, like a file cabinet in my office. It's still accessible, but I need to walk across the room, right, to that file cabinet, pull that piece of paper out. So it takes a little longer to get there. I couldn't just reach over the table to grab it. I'd have to go to the file cabinet to get it, but it is still available. That is in contrast to taking those files out of the file cabinet, right, the piece of paper right out of the file cabinet, putting it in a box and moving it to, the warehouse or wherever, where it takes a lot longer to get, but it is outside your proximity, right, of potential data loss or potential file loss, right? Like to remind people too, right? Look at your Veeam encryption best practices. Should you be encrypting your data? Probably, right? Read this Veeam encryption best practice document. So let's talk about ransomware on how this whole scheme, right? Backups to be configured as immutable on the capacity tier, right? Our cloud object store. So our immutability is based on cloud retention for 21 days. Again, a reminder, immutable backups are not vulnerable to unauthorized access or malicious attacks such as ransomware. So if someone were to compromise your environment, and I hope they don't, and they try to delete your backups or really destroy your backups, they won't be able to within this immutability window, right? So Don't make it easy. Quite the opposite. Make it as difficult as possible. It's your data, and it's critical to your organization. Being able to recover it is essential. So in this particular data plan, right, immutability, the performance tier data is not immutable, but the cloud object storage data is. And this is just, again, one option. So let's go to the summary of this first data recovery plan. We call it Sample Protection Blueprint 1. The summary, right, 38 recovery points over a 2-year period. Probably have more based on the retention, or based on the mechanics of it, rather. First 21 days of the backups are both in the performance tier, right, on your on-premise storage, so immediately recoverable. You can use functions like Sure Backup. You can use functions like Instant Recovery, right, to have that system immediately brought back online. The data is also in the capacity tier, right, your cloud object store, where they are immutable, right? So the first 21 days, both performance and capacity tier, and they're immutable in the capacity tier. Backups are in long-term archives, right? Think, Glacier, right, or the Azure equivalent, after 120 days. Keep in mind it takes a lot more time to recover from the capacity tier than from the performance tier, right? So if you do have an incident and your performance tier data goes away and you have to recover from your capacity tier, it will take you longer. So there's always pluses and minuses to everything, right? So if you look at the sizing of this, if I have X terabytes, let's say I have 10 terabytes, right, of source data, I would consume 2x in the performance tier and 5x in the capacity and archive tiers. So 10 terabytes of source data would consume 20 in the performance tier based on the assumptions we made earlier, and there's some other assumptions too, data compression ratios and REFS and things like that, uh, and 5 times in the capacity archive tiers. So 10 terabytes, right, would consume 20 in the performance, and 50 terabytes somewhere in that capacity archive tier, right, whether it be S3 infrequent access, or whether it be Glacier, or wherever you happen to use or store your data, right? Here's another option, a little different variance. Daily retention points 10 days, weekly retention points 8 weeks, right? Same schedule from above. The difference on this second plan, right, blueprint number 2, is the backups are written to a hardened backup repository in the performance tier, right? So your performance tier here is a hardened Linux appliance. And I encourage you to look at the hardened Linux appliance context on this website as well. So I land my data on this hardened Linux repository where it'll be immutable for 21 days, right? So that data on my local device, my local immutable device, cannot be deleted. After 35 days, right, so 21 days plus 10 is kind of how that whole immutability function works. After 35 days, data would be moved from that performance tier, right, that on-premise hardened repository, to the capacity tier, right, cloud object storage. This is all configured in the scale-out backup repository in the SOBR, and that's after 35 days. So I land my data in my performance tier, make it immutable. After 35 days, move it to the capacity tier, and then at some point, I just listed 120 days, move it from the capacity tier to the archive tier. And again, we do that for, well, 2 reasons. One, that data becomes less relevant or less important to my organization as it gets older. It still needs to be, accessible, right? But I don't want to spend a lot of money to maintain it. That's where Glacier, right, and some of the equivalent architecture does a great job. Same thing here, right? Utilize Veeam storage integration. Have my backups utilize snapshots from my storage array. Just remember, right, snapshots are not backups. Snapshots have limited life. I say snapshots are great, but it's like making a copy of your car key and leaving it on the same key ring. If I lose the key ring, it doesn't matter how many car keys I have on there, my key ring is gone. Same idea here. What is your plan for protecting your backups from ransomware? Right, backups will be configured as immutable on the performance tier, right? That's that hardened Linux repository for 21 days. And immutable backups, as a reminder, are not vulnerable to unauthorized access or malicious attacks such as ransomware, right? That's the definition, right, of immutability. So a little summary, right? 38 recovery points over a 2-year period. First 35 days of backups are in the performance tier, right, on this immutable platform, right? Uh, Backups in the are in the capacity tier after 35 days, right? That's when I do that movement, and then in the long-term archives after 120 days. So little difference in the numbers, right? X terabytes of source data would consume 2x terabytes in the performance tier, that Linux repository, and 4x in the capacity archive tiers. So 10 terabytes, right, would consume 20 in the performance tier and 40 in the cloud. Uh, Another philosophical idea that I think is really important to Veeam, because we do hit all these areas. This is the hierarchy of data protection needs. An interesting graphic, and I'll hit all these areas down here. Let's talk about data protection and the pyramid. So reliable restorability, right? That's the key function. The number one reason why people buy Veeam or do backups in the first place is to have the ability to recover it. A backup without recovery is worthless, right? And we have a number of functions to make that recovery, instantaneous. I want to take my backup from last night. I want to recover from that backup file, turn the server on immediately while I'm doing the restore. Very cool function, right? Um, Data survivability, right? We've hit on this topic already. Enable immutability. I don't want some element, right? Internal, external, to corrupt, destroy, make unusable my data. That's where I enable immutability. And then this whole concept of 32110, which we can cover separately. 3 copies of my data, 2 different devices, 1 offsite, 1 immutable, and 0 errors. This is a topic I'd encourage you to look at in your time, or free time rather. BCDR, or business continuity and disaster recovery. Consider using continuous data protection and or replicas, right? Maybe I have CDP on my critical systems and replicas on my silver systems, right? Depending on how you tier everything off. Use Veeam, right, as part of your availability plan for preparedness and portability. Right, I have a location, a main location, and I take my key workloads and send to my secondary location using CDP. Happy to talk to you about CDP on a separate dialogue as well. Orchestrated workflows. So let's monitor, right, what we're doing, how we're doing it. Let's get reports that come out of Veeam 1 or Shore Backup. I'd encourage you to look at the Shore Backup page reference on, or link rather, on reference on this page. And then Veeam VDRO, or disaster recovery orchestration. It's all about automating your availability. So if something were to happen, it usually comes at the least opportune time, or I should say the most surprising time possible, right? So if you have your documentation in order, and it's not an easy thing to do manually, that's why we have these tools like Shore Backup and Veeam 1 and VDRO. Automate this recovery, testing, and reporting. The last thing you want to be is surprised. I think about the number of Christmases I've had to go into work, or who knows, right? Times when I was least expecting it, and I wasn't prepared, right? This would certainly help me become prepared. And then data reuse. Look into the Veeam data integration APIs to reuse my data. Just a quick example. I did a backup last night. It ran at 10 o'clock. It was done at 10:30. I now have all that data available to do something with today, whether it be analytics, whether it be malware scans, whatever I want to do. There's a lot of power that comes out of the Veeam data integration APIs, and this is a kind of a separate topic from today, but I encourage you to look at it as well. And then finally, 5 benefits of a data retention policy. So why are we even making a data retention policy in the first place? Well, automated compliance. Compliance is not an easy thing. It's easy to miss something within your compliance window, especially with the complexity of some of these compliance plans. That's why you automate that compliance. And then also reduce the likelihood of compliance related fines. All right. You can be held financially liable, right, for not having proper compliance, whether it be GDPR, whether it be HIPAA. You want to avoid those issues as much as you can, and Veeam will help you do that. Reduce storage costs. How much money do I want to spend storing data locally versus the cloud versus which tier on the cloud, right? There's a variety of options that I can store my data in AWS, including, right, a very inexpensive, right, long-term Glacier option, or Wasabi, or Azure, whatever I choose to use. Increased relevancy of existing data. Do I really need to maintain last year's backup on my local disk target? Probably not. Maybe I do, but probably not. The data becomes far less relevant as it becomes older. I'm not trying to say it's not important. It's just not as important, right? The backup from 3 years ago last Tuesday is not nearly as important as yesterday's backup. And then reduce that legal exposure. Uh, don't let your data be used against you, right? Uh, if you don't need to store the data 20 years, don't store the data 20 years. If legally you only need to go 3, by all means, go 3. If the business doesn't care past a certain point, right, get rid of that data. Don't let that be used against you. So I hope this was helpful. By all means, reach out to myself, your local Veeam SEs, or your partners. Happy to help you in any way. Thank you for your time.